you for coming. And today's topic, as you all saw, is hope in a changing world. This is a particular topic for this year because I imagine, as all of you who are Catholic know, this year is the Jubilee of Hope year. And so thinking about hope, how do we think about hope in these times? And when we think about these times, there are times of political polarization. There are times where we're starting to feel the effects of a changing climate. There are times when we're watching technology race ahead and seem to change everything. There are times of change. And so I want to look first this morning at what is hope? And then after our break, we're going to look at hope within one particular context, which will be climate change. Okay, when we think about these times, these are some of the ways in which change is affecting us. It takes us by surprise. We need to recognize the inadequacy of our intellectual tools for measuring the effects of the change that we're undergoing. As we visualize the future, well, it's harder to visualize the future when you see things changing so rapidly. We often feel uncertain in our personal and social life. And uncertainty sparks fear and often defensive reactions. So we turn our gaze inward or towards an idealized past or towards a new tribalism. Now, what does the Bible have to say about what hope is? Well, before we get to that one, forgot this slide. If you go back to Greek mythology, the story of Pandora's box, you remember that in that story, Pandora opens up this box she's not supposed to open, and all the evils in the world fly out. So we could think of all of the things that are causing all this rapid change in our lives as those evils. And then, of course, the last thing to pop out of the box was hope. What does the Bible say? Well, I want to talk first about what the Bible says hope is not. Hope is not fear. Whenever an angel shows up in the Bible, what's the first thing the angel says to people? Fear not, right? I mean, if you go through the Bible, fear not are words you will find over and over again. If we look for just a few of the many examples, we have Isaiah 43. O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. In Joshua 1, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. In Matthew 10, fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. 2 Timothy, for God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And 1 John, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. If we look at these verses, we start seeing the opposite of fear in many of them. So we find, first of all, if we look at Isaiah and Joshua, you are mine. And Joshua, the Lord God is with you wherever you go. So in those verses, we find, why don't we fear? Because we are not alone, because we are God's. Matthew as well, because we are valued. Then in Timothy and in John, we find, do not fear. Our spirit is one of power, love, self-control, which is something you show in action, and no fear in love, again, in the 1 John. Okay, so I think here, as we look at some of these verses that say, do not fear, we start to see, well, then what is the reason not to fear? Okay. To trust in God in the light is nothing, but to trust him in the dark, that is faith. Okay, we live in challenging times, but faith is to trust God in challenging times. To trust again, if we go back, that we are God's, that God will be with us wherever we go, that we are valued, that we have a spirit of power and love, power to act and love out of which to act, and that love will cast out fear. Let's look now, I want to look at Ezekiel 34 in a little more detail here. Okay, Ezekiel 34 is written during the Babylonian captivity. So, as the Psalms tell us, by the rivers of Babylon we wept. The Jews have been removed from their homeland. They're under captivity. Challenging times, right? About as challenging as it can get. In Ezekiel, we read pretty much 33 chapters of exile trauma. The first 33 chapters are saying, damn, this is rough, you know? We're in captivity. We're not in our homeland. We're beaten people. Ezekiel 34 changes. It begins with judgment and then it turns to hope. So first, God warns that judgment will fall on the false shepherds, the wicked leaders who did not care for the Israelite people and caused the exile, and not only on the leaders, but also on the powerful among the people who have committed injustice, what are called the fat sheep that trampled the other sheep. And then it turns to hope. God says, I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, says the Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. God creates a new covenant of peace and gives safety and renewed flourishing to the land and the people. So once again, God is saying, I am with you and I will act. Now, when we turn to Luke 12, we find Jesus that I think in many ways is echoing these sentiments in Ezekiel. In the first part of Luke 12, Jesus publicly attacks the bad shepherds and the imperial collaborators. And then he says, do not fear those who kill the body. The next verse, fear God and God alone. And he warns that his followers will be prosecuted or persecuted by both religious and Roman authorities. And he tells the story of the rich man, full of hubris and greed, and calls that man a fool. The Greek word is basically an egotistical know-nothing, okay? So in these verses, both for the Israelites and for Jesus' followers, they're not saying things are great. And they're not saying, I'll just make them great like that. But what they are saying is, I am with you. And ultimately, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, the arc of moral justice will bend in the right direction. Okay? Ultimately, those are fools who follow the wrong path. Okay, now how about let's turn to the epistles. Now, at the top, the theologian Charles Hodge said, When Paul and the other apostles were called to enter upon their important duties, the world was in a deplorable and yet most interesting state. I think we could use those words to describe our own times, couldn't we? In many ways, it's deplorable, but it's an interesting state. You got to say that. It's sort of like the old Chinese curse, right? May you live in interesting times. Well, we do. We live in interesting times. So, how did Paul react to that? Well, in Romans 5, he speaks of hope and he says, he said some stuff before, and then he says, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. So he's saying there, he starts with perseverance, right? Perseverance means action. Hope is related to action. Okay, we think sometimes that hope is just a feeling, it's just an emotion, I feel hopeful. No, hope is action. Hope says, okay, we may live in interesting times, but I am going to persevere in doing the right thing. And that will form character, and out of that character comes hope. But perseverance comes first, acting. Okay, then a little later in Romans, he says, for in this hope we were saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Here he's saying, hope has a vision. Hope doesn't mean, oh, I just want things to be just the way they are. Because as he says, who hopes for what you've already got? You don't hope for what you've already got. You hope for a better future. And you have to have then a vision for that better future. What is that better future all about? And then you wait for it in patience. But you don't just wait, you go back a couple of verses to Romans 5 and you act. And then a little further in Romans 8, who will separate us from the love of Christ? Hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril of the sword? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. So there he's saying, we are not alone. And on that, we ground our hope. So I want to use these three things to look at hope. That hope is action. That hope has a vision for change, for a better future. And that we aren't acting alone. We don't have to feel like, oh, it's just me. Nothing will separate us from the love of God. Fear not. Okay, one of the most famous parts is when Gabriel appears to Mary. And of course, the first thing you hear is, fear not. And Mary's response, I find quite interesting. In the Magnificat, this is a song about hope. This song, I think, embodies hope all the way through. Okay, so my soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, for he's looking on the humble estate of his servant. For behold, from now on all generations will call me blessed. For he that is mighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. And his mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. So you've got the we are not alone part in the first half. But now let's look at the second half. He's shown strength with his arm. He's scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He's brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate. He's filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. Has he already done those things? No. This is the vision. This is the vision of hope. And Mary sees that vision. Mary has that vision. It doesn't mean that all of this has been accomplished. Now, these are the things that were promised in Ezekiel 34. These are the things that Jesus promised in Luke 12. And Mary, again, is saying these things. She's laying out this vision of a different world, a world of equality, a world without oppression. He's helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, as he spoke to our fathers, to Abraham and his offspring forever. So in this song, we see again the idea that, well, hope is action. There's a big action coming down the pike, right? There's a baby coming. That one is not alone, and that hope has a vision for a different time, a different future, and a different way of living. So let's look at each of these in just a little more detail. Okay, so hope is action. Martin Luther said, "Everything that is done in the world is done by hope. No merchant or tradesman would set himself to work if he did not hope to reap benefit thereby." So he's saying, well, first of all, if you're going to do any action, you start with hope. It's hope that propels you into doing something. It's hope. You don't start thinking, yeah, I'm going to fail at this. Okay. No merchant or tradesman would set to work if he didn't hope to reap benefit. I don't know about any of you, but I'm a great fan of the Great British Baking Show. I get some pictures from past shows here. Nobody's going to enter this show thinking, I'm going to lose. Every cake I bake is going to flop. Everybody enters it with hope. Hope is what propels them to practice, 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 to do their best, to action. As Rebecca Solnit put it, there's a reason why sports teams don't chant, "I believe that we will lose." We're going to lose. We're going to lose. Okay, before a game. The reason is so obvious that I'm pretty sure it needs no explanation in that context. Words have power. They not only describe but shape our reality. Our words shape reality when we tell someone they're worthless or valuable, beautiful or ugly, beloved or unlovable, which is a bit like chanting, "I believe that you will win." Okay, when we think about these words, hope is something that we embody with our actions when we begin a new action. Hope is something that we also embody in our words and in the words that we share with one another. And, we don't start anything saying, I'm going to lose. This isn't going to work. St. Benedict says the same thing in his rule for monasteries. He says, whenever you begin a new action, pray to God that he will help you bring it to completion. And again, this is hope. This is saying, I will do this action and I won't be doing it alone. And again, that's the same thing with the sports team, right? You're doing an action, but no one person is doing it alone. In fact, if we go back a slide, one of the lovable things that I find about the Great British Baking Show is that unlike a lot of competitive shows you see on television, they help each other. You know, they're not out to sabotage each other so that their bake will be better. You know, if one of them finishes and the other one is struggling to finish, like you see in the picture at the bottom, they'll rush over and help the other one to actually get their bake done. So hope is action, and we do not act alone. We act with each other, and we act with God. And a lot of times this takes a lot of courage. Okay, now here are a couple of exemplars. We have to remember again, courage is not the absence of fear, but taking action despite our fears. So if we go back to all of those angels saying, fear not, to all of those Bible verses that say, fear not, do not fear, what are they saying? Okay, they're not saying, okay, stop that emotion. That's a bad emotion. Don't feel that emotion that you're feeling. Because can you say that to somebody? I mean, does that work? You can't say to somebody, stop feeling what you're feeling. You're going to feel what we feel. Okay? What it says is have courage, take action despite the fact that you might feel fear. Hope says, okay, yeah, I'm afraid. You know, I don't like this situation. This does not feel good. But I'm going to act anyway. And I'm going to act as I think is best. One of the best exemplars, I think, is the late Alexei Navalny, who you see pictured at the top, in Russia. After he was poisoned and flown to Germany for medical treatment, what did he do? He went back to Russia. Was he afraid? Of course. They tried to kill him. He knew they would try again, but he said, I can't be a leader. I can't be a prophet if I don't go back to my people. If I'm not with my people. Remember, hope is action that we do together. And so he went back to Russia. Now that takes courage when they've already tried to poison him and he goes back anyway, knowing, of course, they're going to try again, which they did. Okay. That's hope. Okay, Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu. How did he manage all the years he was imprisoned by the South African regime? He had hope. He had a vision for a different South Africa, one of equality and racial harmony. And it was that vision that propelled him to keep going despite years in prison. Okay, and then the woman on the side that you see there, her name is Andre Goylen Hetskovici. She was Dutch. And during World War II and the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, she saved hundreds of Jewish children. She was a school teacher. Her first act when the Nazis proclaimed that all Jews had to wear the yellow star was to make yellow stars for her entire class. And she said, well, okay, we'll all wear a yellow star. Hope is action together. She had all her students wear the yellow star so that if someone came to the classroom and said, which kids are Jewish? Well, They're all wearing a star. They're obviously not all Jewish. It's hard to single the others out. Later in the war, then she actually helped Jewish children find safe houses and safe places and live through this. So here we have people who all acted despite their fears. I'm sure they all felt afraid at times. But hope overcomes that. Hope says, act anyway, have courage, act despite your fears. A story that I love that one of the monks told me here at St. John's is that during one of their retreats, every year in June, they have a retreat, and they have a retreat master who comes from, some other monastic house. And one year they had an Irishman who came to be their retreat master. And he was talking about this subject that, acting with courage, with hope, despite your fears or your misgivings. And he said, all right, there are 3 questions you can ask after you do something. And the first question is, did I try? That's a good question to ask yourself. Okay? But there are 2 other questions you can ask. And they are, did I try hard enough? And did I succeed? And as sure as I'm standing here in front of you, you ask those 2 questions and there's a trapdoor over your head and it's going to open up and a whole load of shit is going to come down. Okay? I love this story because, it's kind of true, right? So he says, go ahead and act. And then afterwards, you can ask the question, did I try? But don't you be worrying yourself about, did I try hard enough? Did I succeed? You might not succeed. Okay, if we go back again, did Navalny succeed? Well, he didn't overturn Putin. Putin's still the president of Russia. Was it worthwhile that he tried? Oh, yeah. Did trying make a difference? Oh, yeah. Okay. Did he try hard enough? Well, he tried pretty hard. He gave up his life, right? Don't ask those questions. He tried. Okay. Did Andrei Herzkovich save every Jewish child in the Netherlands? No. Could she have asked herself, oh, I should have tried harder? There were still children who weren't saved. She saved a lot of children. She tried. Did she succeed? Yes. Did she succeed in saving every child? No. Okay. So we ask the first question, did I try? We don't ask the other 2. Okay, let's move on to the second. Hope requires a vision. We hear this echoed right in Dr. Martin Luther King saying, I have a dream. He had a dream. That was his most powerful, I'd say his most memorable speech. We all remember those words and the words that follow it about what his dream looked like of people of all races living harmoniously together in America. Did he succeed? Not yet. Okay, has his dream come to fruition? Well, maybe partly, but obviously we're seeing today that no, not completely. All right. But he had a vision. And you can say If we go all the way back, in fact, to our Bible verses, what did the last one from, let's see, from Romans say? It said, and we wait with patience. We wait with patience. As Martin Luther King said, the moral arc bends towards justice, but it's slowly. It takes a while. And yet, the Confederacy did lose. Slavery was abolished. Hitler's Reich did not last for 1,000 years. He died by suicide in a bunker. Joseph McCarthy's attack on Americans as communists ended with shame and his own death. John Lewis did not give up the dream of civil rights after a bloody beating on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Okay? So if we look back at history and we say, geez, I'm trying and I don't see much happening here, you have to say, well, but good things did happen. That arc did bend towards justice. But it takes a lot of time. And sometimes when we see progress, we'd like to think it's a nice straight line, right? But often it's a kind of a spiral where, you see some progress and then whoops, and then you see some more progress and then whoops. And that's okay. That's the way things work. We wait with patience, as the scripture said. Another vision. George Fox, who was the founder of Quakerism. And this is during the time of the religious wars in England. There were bloody battles fought around England. And the earliest Quakers who had a vision of total equality, equality among social classes, equality between men and women, equality between people of different races. It was not, of course, taken too well by the people who were on top. Okay, so most of the earliest Quakers spent at least some time in prison. In fact, there's one lovely story about how all the adults in a given meeting were arrested and put into prison, and the children kept the meeting going. It was the children who kept meeting to worship together. Okay, so George Fox said, I saw also that there was an ocean of darkness and death. It was easy for him to see this ocean of darkness and death. At one point, he walked across a battlefield. Right after the battle, there were still little skirmishes going on in the side. There were dead bodies all over the field. Just an ocean of darkness and death, but an infinite ocean of light and love, which flowed over the ocean of darkness. And in that also, I saw the infinite love of God. So he had a vision. His vision was, yes, I see this ocean of darkness and death that we seem to be living in right now. But covering it, over it, there's an infinite ocean of love, of life and love. And that infinite ocean is the infinite love of God. Okay, lots of words on this one, but here's someone else with a vision, the Hopi Indian chief White Eagle. And he said, do not underestimate the spiritual dimension of this crisis. So he's not talking about, the 1960s. He's not talking about the 1660s. He's talking about right now. And he says, do not underestimate the spiritual dimension of this crisis. Take this perspective of an eagle that sees everything from above with a broader view. There's a social question in this crisis, but also a spiritual question. Without the social dimension, we fall into fanaticism. Without the spiritual dimension, we fall into pessimism and futility. Okay, so here he's saying, like, he says, take the view of the eagle. I see this almost like George Fox saying, I see this ocean of infinite love. It's above, it's over the death and darkness that we're seeing right now. There's a social dimension and a spiritual dimension to every crisis, whatever crisis you're looking at. Then he says, are you ready to face this crisis? Grab your toolbox and use all the tools at your disposal. So, vision first, then action. Grab your toolbox, get going. Okay. And then finally, learn resistance from the example of Indian and African peoples. We have been and are exterminated, but we never stopped singing, dancing, lighting a fire, and rejoicing. You have the right to be strong and positive. When we cross the threshold, we have a new worldview because we faced our fears and difficulties. This is all you can do now. Okay, so have a vision, take action, recognize that you are not alone. And that's all you can do. So stop asking those other questions. Did I succeed? Whoops, trapdoor. You do what you can. That's what hope is all about. And that brings us to take another look at our third thing about hope. That hope recognizes that we are not alone. Okay, we're here at God's initiative, not ours. He invites us to take part in his work, a work that is full of risks. Work is always full of risks. And at the bottom, and remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. These were, some part of the last talk that Jesus gave to his disciples. At one point, I found these words immensely comforting. This was back when I was much younger. It looked like you guys are mostly my age or so you remember the Cold War and, probably the Cuban Missile Crisis and times when it looked like maybe we were right on the edge of a nuclear war with Russia. My family tells a story of the first time there was a sonic boom, the airplane broke the sound barrier. I was 3 years old. I was out in the driveway with my tricycle and with my big sister who was out, with her bicycle next to me. I heard this boom and my sister said, I started saying, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. and rushing back, to the garage with my tricycle. So I had my fears as a child. In school, of course, we had to do the duck and cover drills where we'd all go under our desk. Yeah, you remember those? And I'm thinking that really would have helped. I don't think so, but anyway. And I remember at one point, being quite fearful of this as a child. And it was the remembrance of this verse. Probably my mother told it to me, again and again, that, we're not alone. Jesus promised to be with us, even to the end of the age. Here I was thinking it's going to be nuclear war with Russia and it's going to be the end of the world. And these words say, well, okay, maybe it is the end of the age. I am with you. Even if it is the end of the age, I am with you. Do not fear, little flock. Okay. Oh, I got through that a little faster than I expected. So I've outlined what I see as sort of the three parts of hope. That hope is an action, not a feeling. Okay, that hope tells us that we are not alone, that we are both together with each other, and that God is with us, and that hope has that vision. That hope is not about saying, I want things to stay exactly as they are. You don't hope for things you already have. Hope isn't even looking backwards. Hope is looking forwards. Hope is a vision for the future. That gives us the template with which we can act. And we act with confidence because we know we are not alone. Even to the end of the age. That's why I have this picture up here, someone planting a little tree. Because this has been attributed to Martin Luther, it's been attributed to Mohammed, it's been attributed to I don't know how many people, but it's a wonderful saying. And that is, if you knew that the world was going to end today, or if I knew that the world was going to end today, I would plant a tree. Okay? Even to the end of the age. Of course, we don't know when the end of the age will come. Jesus said even he didn't know. The angels don't know. So there's no point in our saying we know. I always look at, apocalyptic groups that say, oh, it's going to happen on October 6th, There is one right now saying that, so be prepared for October 6th. But I'm thinking, how can you think you know when the angels don't know? When Jesus said, even the Son doesn't know, only the Father knows when the end of the age will come. So we look at some of the problems that we see now in our world, whether it's problems in our democracy, whether it's climate change, whether it's computers. A recent book just came out that said, if they build it, we will all die. We're talking about superintelligence. So there are people within the computer science community who are saying, okay, this AI stuff is getting out of hand. We're all going to die. Well, we don't know. We don't know about the end of the age. We do know that God is with us and calling us to act on a better vision. So in the second half of our morning, I'm going to talk about more concretely, well, what does that vision mean in terms, it was like, okay, pick one. Let's do climate change since I'm now the director of Benedictine spirituality and the environment, and say, how do we apply this vision of hope to a particular case? Okay, so in the second half of our morning, I'm going to talk particularly about probably the area where I most need hope personally, and that is climate change. It's also the area that first got me thinking about hope. My field is basically religion and technology, as you probably heard in the introduction. I was a computer scientist, so, religion and AI is pretty much what I do these days. A couple of years ago, I was asked to give a talk as part of a conference for the what is it, Institute for Religion and Science, and they were focusing on climate change. And because I had written some stuff on AI's bad effect on climate change, I thought, oh, that's what they want. Okay, fine, I can talk about that. And then a little bit later, the organizer got in touch with me and he said, you're the final keynote, and we want everybody to leave with some hope. So we need you to talk about hope. And I was like, oh dear, I think that trapdoor just opened because I don't have a lot of hope. I'm not feeling it, And so that made me look at hope and think, okay, if I'm not feeling it, where can I find hope? How can I find hope? What is hope? And that got me started. So, much of the second part will be the talk that I gave. But first, I want to preface it with Some slides that I have courtesy of meteorologist Paul Douglas. Most of you probably know Paul Douglas. He's come to our campus to talk a couple of times, as well as being on WCCO and the Star Tribune and everywhere. So, you know, he's pointed out that here are the global trends in average temperature since the 1880s. It's a pretty stark graph. You can see that clearly things have been rising since. How about World War II? Okay. And we are right in the bullseye. If you look at the places where there's been observed temperature change, and this is only till 2018, but it hasn't changed since then, you'll see that Minnesota is, pretty dark on here. Temperature change is being observed faster the further north you go. And we've all experienced that, right? Because what happens now in the summer that didn't used to happen? Drought? Okay, well, that drought has happened before, like in the Dust Bowl. But there's something that we've been experiencing the last couple of years we didn't used to experience. Okay. Heat? Heat, heat. Fire, smoke. All that smoke coming down from Canada? Okay, that didn't used to happen. And I grew up here in Minnesota. I don't remember ever having those days when, you could smell the smoke or it was too smoky to really play outside or even, I don't think we experienced it so much this year, but in the last couple, I think 2 years ago when the sky was orange, you know. That's because climate change is happening more rapidly the further north you go. And so it's affecting Canada even more than Minnesota. But you can see here that all across the northern tier, Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, over in Maine, there's been a lot of change, a lot more warming than in other places. The farmers are noticing changing patterns in the growing season. So if we look at this chart, we have charted on here both the number of days between spring and fall and the average number of non-freezing days. And you can see how they have gone up, in fact, really shot up in the 2010s. Again, not quite up to date for the last 5 years, but farmers are noticing the growing season is longer. Now you could say, well, that's a good thing, right? We could maybe get in a second crop or things will get bigger. They've got a longer growing season. But of course, along with that, as some of you mentioned, heat, drought, that growing season is not always the most conducive to growing. Paul Douglas calls this, the weather is playing out of tune. And as a meteorologist, he said that he has noticed this in Minnesota, that his weather started, you pretty much knew year from year what was going to happen. And he said all of a sudden it just became different. Storms were more extreme, droughts were more extreme. In general, the weather just seemed a little more extreme, or as he said, just a little out of tune, not what he was used to it being. And people say, well, it's so due to solar activity. Paul says, no, it's not the sun. That the temperature, the 11-year average, is the red line there, and that's gone pretty steadily up Well, solar irradiance, it did go up, but it went up the most in like the 1950s, and it's been coming down a little bit since then. In fact, quite a bit towards the end. But in general, it's not on quite the same trajectory. And of course, there are consequences for human beings, not just for crops. The World Health Organization estimates that there are 7 million premature deaths every year worldwide. According to the World Health Organization, if you think about people who die because of weather-related activity, and we tend to think, okay, people drown in floods, they get hit by lightning, they die in tornadoes and hurricanes. No, it's heat. More people die from heat than from any other weather-related cause. And of course, it's hard on children, especially children and the elderly are the ones who are most impacted by climate change. And 1 in 3 American children now suffer from asthma or allergies or something, some other kind of disorder that seems to be exacerbated by heat and pollution. Okay. Every faith group honors God's creation. We say in the Psalm, the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it, for God has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers. We notice in Genesis 1 that human beings are given stewardship over the earth. And I suppose we need to start asking that first question, right? Did we try? Okay. The Reverend Billy Graham has said, it's not right for us to, I'm not sure what's hidden under there, to do something to the world. Probably damage the world God has given us. He's created everything. To drive to extinction something he has created is wrong. He has a purpose for everything. We Christians have a responsibility to take the lead in caring for the earth. Okay, thank you, Paul. So that sort of sets out the problem. Okay, the climate is changing. It is due to our, at least partially due to our actions as human beings. Now, how can we feel hope in this situation? Or do we just say, okay, well, yeah, it's all going to burn up. There it goes. So let's remember, again, our 3 things about hope. The first of all, hope is action. Again, let's go back to World War II. Let's go back and think about the French resistance in World War II. Things look pretty awful for them. Okay, the Nazis had taken over Paris. The Vichy regime and the part of France that was not occupied by the Nazis was collaborating with the Nazis. Things were pretty dark. And each person could have thought, what can I do? I can't do anything in this situation. We're occupied. It's kind of like the Israelites by the rivers of Babylon. We've been taken over by another country. What can we do? But not everybody said that. So here's a French resistance fighter here. And she said the Germans had robbed us of liberty. If you think about, the French coming out of the French Revolution, they say liberty, equality, fraternity. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. And so she said, well, they robbed us of liberty, they'd robbed us of equality, but they couldn't rob us of fraternity. The French resistance started with very small actions. Okay, let's see what we can just, the troop trains are coming this way, let's blow up a bridge. It's not going to stop the train. I mean, it will temporarily, but they'll rebuild the bridge. The train will go through, but it made things a little harder for them. They started just with very small actions that more or less just kind of guerrilla harassment of the Nazis. But in the end, they were actually instrumental. Small actions add up, in other words. So when we think about climate change, there's a website out there called Project Drawdown. You can just Google Project Drawdown, or I think it's just projectdrawdown.org. And they have 100 small things you can do to fight climate change. Now, each one by itself might not seem like that much. But when you have a lot of people each doing some small action, just like the French Resistance, where she said, the little actions each person as an individual could do didn't seem like much. But when you added them all together and as the resistance grew, it really had an effect. So, and when we look at some of these, and I think especially when we look at even some of the more important ones, you might think, well, how about reduced food waste and a plant-rich diet? We can each do that. We can try to get our organizations to do more of that. How about educating girls? Well, a lot of us are involved in education. We're doing that. Okay, family planning. Better refrigeration. Maybe you want to replace that old beater refrigerator. Don't just put it in the garage and keep it running, get a new one. So there's lots and lots of things, and some of the things that have the most effect are small things that can be done without, you don't need a lot of money to do a lot of these things. Now, some of these others, like more geothermal, well, that's a big deal. You can't do that by yourself. But many of these things we can do. Okay, what does educating girls mean? Well, for one thing, if we look back at this, you'll notice down at the bottom, family planning right next to it. Educating girls generally means more family planning. Girls who are not educated were married off at 13, not in our country, but in other countries, tend to have a lot more children. Again, not educating the children. The more educated people are, the more they will then themselves turn and do small things. So educating girls matters. Again, what happens in this country, most girls are educated. But in other countries, particularly in the global south, this still isn't the case. Well, first of all, if they're educated, they're probably going to have fewer children. Secondly, if they're educated, they're more likely to educate their own children. And third, if they're educated, they're more likely to have the tools so that they themselves can take action in their own countries, so that they themselves can take some of these other actions, such as planting trees, such as learning that there are other ways to cook besides cooking on a wood fire, for example. So educating girls, because girls are, the women tend the home, it's women who can be agents of change often when it comes to things like agriculture, like cooking methods, even, pushing their husbands to also be agents of change. Educating girls really matters. Okay, now there are big ways that we can do things that we can't maybe do things as individuals. And we do have to recognize that every change may come with side effects that we might not want. So here, for example, you see a kelp forest. And kelp can be used in a lot of ways. So we could actually do kelp farming. But we also have to be careful. If we overgrow kelp, we get kelp all over the beaches. And that can be a problem, in fact, is a problem in some parts of the South already. So one of the things that we have to be careful of is that as we make changes, we watch to see what the side effects might be. Now, you might think, well, I'm not growing a kelp forest in Minnesota, so that's no help. But here's one change that would make a big difference. Having a bidet in your bathroom. Okay, not only do you have a cleaner tush, you use less toilet paper, and less toilet paper means more trees, and more trees means we're cleaning more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So there are little ways that can be done just in your home that can make a difference, because I don't have the statistic in front of me today, but you know, the average household goes through an awful lot of toilet paper, and that's a lot of trees. And most toilet paper is not made out of recycled paper. It's made out of freshly cut down trees, and it's trees that pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So think about little things like that. Okay, an induction cooktop is another one. If you put in an induction cooktop, instead of using gas to cook on, it saves a lot of fumes going into your house, for one thing. And they're finding now that indoor air pollution can be as bad for our health, and particularly for the health of children, as outdoor air pollution. And that a lot of that comes from gas appliances in the house. Solar, and that means not just rooftop solar, putting in a heat pump instead of using regular air conditioner. And, you know, you will actually save money after, well, you need it for some years. It's about 6 years that you start to save money if you install like rooftop solar. But really the solar that makes the difference is what we're starting to see here in Minnesota as you start to see the fields of solar panels. The picture in the background actually comes from China. China is the biggest maker, seller, and user of solar panels. And China has a lot of desert area. Most of the center of China and the west of China is desert. And they're putting in, as you can see, huge fields of solar. Yeah. Right.
Utilities. Last week, mentioned that the utility. I mentioned that the utility manager should be congratulated for implementing time of use metering.
Mm-hmm.
So when you can regulate your utility usage to nighttime, and my hybrid plug-in electric car has a timer on it where you can program it, which I'm gonna have to figure out how to do it, where it only recharges at night, off-peak hours. But yeah, solar is a wonderful investment.
Yep, it is. Okay, we got another question in the back there.
Examples of using a hybrid system where in Big Lake, which was a very polluted kind of energy that we were receiving, has built a huge amount of solar array there. And so when the sun's out, they're switched to the solar. When the sun's, at sundown and evening, they would use coal.
Uh-huh.
So it is a hybrid system. It's going in the right direction, as you were talking about. So
Yeah, yeah.
excited about that.
And hybrid systems are good. You know, I have a plug-in hybrid car because I only have one car. And most of the time, I mean, I live about 5 miles from campus, so I can go on electricity. And then if I have to drive to the cities or, you know, up to the North Shore or something, which I don't do very often, you know, then it can kick over and use gas. So yeah, these are all very useful. So all of this is to say, you might not be feeling hope, but taking action matters. You can take action. They can be small actions. Because again, you know, you're not going to solve the problem alone, but you don't have to. We are not alone. You know, same thing with the French resistance. Each one of them, no one of them could stop the Nazis, of course not. But they weren't alone. And together, they could make a difference. And so together, we can make a difference. Even with small actions, it may feel like small actions are never enough. But they do make a difference. Okay?
You know, you see all these these solar panels. What happens with them 10 years from now? They only last 10 to 20 years. So then we're going to have a lot of landfill of all these solar panels.
Everything has drawbacks. I think we got a gentleman with the answer there.
I oftentimes hear this question, and it speaks to another issue that we deal with, electronic waste.
Yes.
Your cell phones, computers,
Yeah.
short life. Solar cells have solar panels have expected lifespan of 100 years. They degrade 0.4% per year. I went around with the utility conservation manager, well, may not pay for themselves in the expected lifespan. And I said, what's the expected lifespan? 0.4% per year they degrade. We've had a long history. In fact, I graduated from St. John's in 73. I did my senior thesis on solar cells, these little cells that are putting on satellites to power the satellites. We probably still have solar cells from the 70s that are generating electricity yet. And so when you're dealing with electronic waste, yes, these panels eventually, wind turbines, everything else is going to end up in landfill. But the real problem we're facing with, where's your computer? Where's your cell phone going to end up?
Yeah, and that's a whole nother talk. Some of you have probably heard me giving my computer talk. And if you have questions about that, we can get to that later. Okay, another way that we can act. Here we have the young people in Montana who sued the state because they said their state constitution promises that they will have a clean environment and a healthy environment. And so they said the types of laws that are being passed here in Montana, the regulations, they're not in sync with our Constitution. And so they sued the state and they won. On the bottom, you see a picture from, this is a group, well, there's actually Greenpeace on that particular sign, but there's a group called Third Act, which is made up of folks my age and older who are saying we need to think about the grandchildren. And we are retired. We've got the time to write to our Congress people to demand different legislation. Again, the arc might bend kind of slowly. So we turn there to Václav Havel, who is kind of saying the same thing that our Irish monk said. He, of course, was fighting the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. And he said, neither I nor anyone else will ever win this war once and for all. At the very most, we can win a battle or two, and not even that is certain. Yet I still think it makes sense to wage this war persistently. I have few illusions, but I feel a responsibility to work towards the things I consider good and right. I don't know whether I'll be able to change certain things for the better or not at all. Both outcomes are possible. There is only one thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause. So when we think, okay, well, all these little actions, they're really not going to do anything. It's not going to change anything. You know, again, just like Alexei Navalny, Václav Havel, fighting the government of his country. And, well, they won. Okay, things did change. Czechoslovakia is now a democracy. But he didn't know that was going to happen. It certainly didn't look like that was going to happen back in the 80s and the 90s. And yet he said, there's one thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause. So hope says, I'm heading for that vision. I'm going to take action. I'm not going to ask the second two questions. Okay? I might not succeed, but it's not meaningless to strive. Or as Dr. Martin Luther King said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So when I look back at these young people and other young people, they're saying, we're not going to be silent. We might not win. You know, they won this particular case, they'll lose others. The grandparents are saying, we're not going to be silent because that it's not meaningless to strive in a good cause. Don't be silent about things that matter. Take action, whatever action you can. Okay, got a question or a comment in the back again? Hang on just a sec, your mic's coming.
Voice is not loud enough.
Well, there's people online and the online people
Oh,
can't
sorry.
hear.
Sorry for onliners. But will AI in a negative way or positive way make big changes for climate change?
Negative, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm not giving my AI talk today, but let me say a few things about this. Yeah, right now I see AI and climate change on a collision course, unfortunately. All of the big companies had climate pledges, Google, Meta, OpenAI, that they were going to work toward sustainability by 2030. All those climate pledges are out the door. Okay, because right now they're in kind of an arms race to see who can be the first to come up with what they call an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, which would be an AI that could have the broad intelligence of a human being. They are spending trillions of dollars. Most of it's coming from venture capital. Some of it is coming out of our market system. Unfortunately, right now, about 20% of the market's value is in AI. It's my belief as a computer scientist, I'm not speaking as a theologian now, even though I use the word belief, but as a computer scientist, that they're throwing that money away. We're not going to get there. Okay, because we cannot get there with the AI that we currently have. The AI that we currently have, these large language models, they need to be trained on a ton of data. Okay, and then what they do, if you think about it, you know, what they do is they take in this data and they determine the statistical probabilities of what will follow what. And so when something like ChatGPT gives you an answer that sounds like it understood your question, it's simply looking in its training, and it essentially says, if I hear these words, I say those words. Okay? But it doesn't know what the words mean. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is it doesn't have a connection between words and the physical world. We do. We have mental models that we build when we're children. You know, we know what words mean, how they connect to physicality. So just to give you an example, when you see a picture generated by AI and it's got a hand with 6 fingers in it, you know, it's because that AI was trained on pictures that had hands in them. But in pictures that have hands in them, you don't always see the hand looking just like this. You often see hands like this, you know, or hands like this. And so all the AI knows is what roughly looks like a hand. But to the AI, hands could have any number of fingers, right? Well, at least maybe up to 10. Although maybe you have a third hand, you know, somebody else in there, it could have up to 15. Because it doesn't have this mental model that says hand. I know what a hand is. Oh, a hand, yeah. Hands have 5 fingers. But if they're intertwined with other hands, you know, you may see more than 5, but only when they're intertwined. Well, even that, if you program that in, you have the trouble with, like there's a picture that was generated by AI of President Trump praying. And, you know, so his hands are together, but he's got 6 fingers on one of them. Well, it's hands together, you know, oh, let's go crazy with the fingers. So 6 fingers on one hand, 4 on the other. We still got 10 fingers, you know. You see, AI just doesn't have that mental model underneath that says, no, you got to have 5 fingers that are attached to one hand and attached to a palm. So that's the problem. That's why AI will always hallucinate. Now, I don't think hallucination is a very good word. I would say confabulate, make stuff up. And there's no getting past that. So the road we're currently on and that we're throwing trillions of dollars into is a dead end. It's not going to get where they think it's going to get. You might get you know, you can get a fairly good facsimile. The problem is these programs are brittle. In other words, they can work pretty well when they stay very close to their training, but as soon as they get, you know, to a more of an edge case, they just utterly fail. And so when I think about climate change, you got to think about several things. You already mentioned the hardware that goes into this. Now, this is a problem in certain areas, for example, cybercurrency. Much of cybercurrency is using specialized hardware that only lasts a couple of years. Okay, this is a problem. You've got the training of an AI that uses large amounts of energy and water to cool these systems. And then you've got the usage of AI. Now, if you ask ChatGPT a question, you know, like, what's the average temperature in Minnesota in October? And you ask Google the same question. And not modern Google now, which is going to give you an AI thingy at first, but like the old Google where it would send you to a website that would answer your question. You're using 10 times the amount of energy to answer that question when you use the AI. Now, as long as AI is used, or as long as cybercurrency is only used by a small group of enthusiasts, no problem, but it won't scale. If you try to scale it up so that everybody is using these things, we are, in trouble climate-wise because of the tremendous usage. Microsoft has asked for the nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island, to be put back online just for them, just for their AI data training. So, yeah, this is a problem. AI and climate change, AI is going to exacerbate, already is exacerbating climate change. And yeah, and right now, politically, this move towards using fossil fuels as our primary fuel source is really problematic. So I'm trying not to be silent on what I think matters, and I think I know something about. Another person who is not silent, or was not silent about that, was Pope Francis. And fortunately, Pope Leo is following in his footsteps. So in Laudato Si, Francis warned us of falling into a technological paradigm. And this, again, will speak to the previous question. The technological paradigm is the mindset that says, our technology will fix everything. And there are a lot of people who say that. They say, well, once we get AGI, it'll figure out how to fix climate change. And I'm thinking it will. How's it going to do that when we don't know how to do it? Or when we do know how to do it, but we don't have the political will to do it? An AGI is not going to give us political backbone. Okay? The technological paradigm that Francis warned us against is thinking, well, we just won't worry about it because once we solve the AI question, that AI will solve the climate change question. Well, now we're at the book I mentioned earlier by 2 AI scientists who said, if we build it, we will all die. And they're basically saying, look, if we built an AGI and we gave power to it, now having it and giving it power are 2 different things, and we gave power to it and then we told it, solve climate change, it's probably going to say, oh, I know how to do that, kill all the people. So yeah, we got to be careful with these things. Now, the other thing in Laudato Si that has now popped up is a vision. Francis laid out a vision for us 10 years ago. First in Laudato Si, he lays out the problem, as we kind of did with Paul Douglas's slides. And then he says, I have a vision of a better world. I have a vision of how we can fix this. And he lays out a vision. I think we can all have a vision, and most of us all do have a vision of a better world, of a world where we have food and enough food and safe food, of a world where our cities have green spaces, of a world where we have safe, efficient, and non-polluting public transportation. We have visions of living this way. I often find, as Grace mentioned, I'm a senior researcher at an institute in Slovenia. It's kind of a Slovenian think tank. And when I go over there, I find myself thinking, they're doing some things better over there than we are. European cities, which of course grew at a different time historically, are much more compact, much more easy to walk around. Almost no matter where you live, you can pretty well walk to a grocery store. You can have a little refrigerator in your house because you can walk to the grocery store every day or every other day. And then you have fresher food. It's actually kind of nice. There's public transportation. You can take the train. You don't have to fly everywhere if you're going to another city. They've done some things better than we have. And they are dreaming big dreams of better housing. Here you see pictures of green housing that actually exist in Vienna. So they have a new development near the Danube where they have both student housing, elderly housing, regular housing, schools, and you can see that they have built it in such a way that there's green space on the buildings as well as, you know, just between or among the buildings. We had some at one time earth-covered houses here on campus. You can see they've got some there where they're actually putting grass on the roof. This is really helpful because it cools the house and it reflects better, so that it's not just, you know, like black shingles soaking up the sun's rays. So we can have a vision of a better way to live. We can look at places globally and say, can we copy that? Can we do that too? There's a lot that we can do. And then we have the third thing we have to remember, we are not alone. And as I was trying to, you know, put the stock together for a conference on climate change, and I thought, okay, yeah, you know, I can find actions that we can do. The visions are out there. We can have a vision. Most of us, I think, do have a vision of better ways to do things, of better ways that we would like to live on our planet. But then the thing that helped actually say, okay, maybe I don't have to be afraid, is this, coming back to God's promise that, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, to fear not. And we see God's promise in nature. Nature is resilient. Nature wants to live. Nature wants to fix itself. Here we have a picture of one of the oldest trees on Earth. These are bristlecone pines. You know, when we tend to think of, oh, the oldest trees on Earth, we might think of mighty sequoias and stuff. Well, it turns out, no, the oldest trees here in the United States are these bristlecone pines. And they're not very big. You know, they're maybe 10 feet tall. And you can see they're not huge. They're living in a pretty harsh area. Okay, I actually took this picture. It's in Big Basin National Park, which is up in the mountains in the middle of the Nevada desert. All right, but up in the mountains, it's cooler. When any clouds are coming by, the mountains catch it, they dump. And so there's stuff living up there. And it's these bristlecone pines. In a very harsh setting, they have lived for thousands of years. Or look at Chernobyl. After the Chernobyl disaster in Russia, the whole area all around Chernobyl became a no-go zone. And now you have some pictures of what it looks like today. Animals have moved back in. Okay, first plants moved back in. And you can see the abandoned apartment buildings, and now they're just completely surrounded by trees that are happily growing despite the fact that there's still a lot of radiation there. Animals have moved in. They tend to have a somewhat shorter lifespan than animals would that are not living in an irradiated zone, but they're living, they're reproducing. Nature, if we let it, will fix, and it will fix things faster than you imagine. We tend to think, oh, we've made a mess of a place, it's just going to take forever. No, it doesn't take long. We feel bad when we look in northern Minnesota or up in Canada at the areas that have had forest fires, But actually, some of the trees don't propagate until there is a fire. It has to have fire and heat to open the pine cones and for the seeds to drop out and actually go. And I went back to Yellowstone just a couple of years after they had had a very major fire. And I had been to Yellowstone a few years previous, and I remembered its beauty. And when I saw the pictures of the forest fire, I thought, oh gosh, this is terrible. I mean, I feel awful. But I went back and those areas were changed. They were different. They did not have big trees, but they had tons of little trees coming up and they were just covered with purple fireweed. It was actually quite beautiful in its own way. Not the same as it was, but still, nature came back immediately. Nature has come back to Chernobyl and reclaimed it, despite probably the worst we could do, radiation. Or another example is Moyen Island. It's one of the islands in the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean. And this island had been clear cut and it was pretty much barren. And so there was no one living on it, couldn't live there, it was barren. There were no animals living on it. Basically, almost nothing growing on it. And so the country of the Seychelles pretty much gave it, probably sold it for $1 or something, to a British man. And he was determined to bring it back. And so he started planting stuff on the island. Started with small plants, then when they took root, and then they died, their dead bodies provided more soil. He started moving to bigger plants. This is a picture of the island today. It happened in one man's lifetime that he took this barren island, he turned it into this, and then, turtles swam across from a different island, laid their eggs on this island. Somehow, birds came. Oh, that was easy for the birds, easier than for the turtles. And pretty soon, you had amphibians, you had reptiles, you had birds repopulating the island. All within one adult lifetime. So we're not working alone. Nature will work with us, and God will work with us. And I find this really encouraging that I think, okay, well, even if we do our worst, nature will find ways to be resilient. God will make the earth bloom again. Theologian at Georgetown, John Holt, says, faith rejoices that the same divine promise that brought Israel and the church into being has for billions of years been drawing the whole universe toward an unimaginable future informed by cosmic hope, an ecological spirituality that trusts that the divine field of attraction we refer to as the Holy Spirit is still at work in the entire cosmos and applies not only to the people of God, but also, as St. Paul came to see, to the whole of creation. The Holy Spirit is at work. We are not working alone. The Holy Spirit is working with us, both in the hearts of other people and in the creation itself, in nature itself. This is a picture from the new Webb telescope, looking at the deep cosmos. And all of those things that you see pictured in there, all of those red and yellow and green and blue spots, those aren't stars, those are galaxies. Each one of those is a galaxy of stars. That tells you something about God's power, doesn't it? God's infinite power. And so, you know, there is that infinite ocean of love and life. And we can work with it. And it will, he, she will work with us as well. So I find, I look at this and, it blows my mind for the size of the universe that we're just starting to see. And then I think about the power and the infiniteness of God. But then at the same time, I come back to that verse we looked at later that said, do not fear, you are worth more than the sparrows. That God, even our God, who created all of this, all those galaxies, and that's only looking at one little corner of the universe. When the universe goes all the way around, think about how many galaxies that is. Okay? And he also knows when a single sparrow falls. So if you knew the world would end tomorrow, plant a tree. Okay, I'm going to end there. It's 11 o'clock. We've got some time for questions and for discussion. So we've already had some questions, some discussion, but let's have more. What gives you hope? Where do you find hope? How do you understand hope? Go ahead.
I personally need more hope for the condition we're in now with our political life. And I can see that we can shift many of the basic principles you're talking about to answer my own question. So that's been very helpful, but yet it's like I need something more concrete. Could you suggest some things that will help me out of my deep morass of hopelessness about what's going on?
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go way back. Let's get out of the climate change part, go back to the front. All the way back. I'm going to go back here. Okay, first maybe we'll go back here. Okay. To trust in God in the light is nothing, but to trust him in the dark, that is faith. So you're feeling like we're in the dark right now. And that's nothing new. We go back to the Ezekiel, imagine how the Israelites felt when they had not only been occupied by the Persians, but they were actually forcibly deported. Now we're seeing that happening now in our own country. This is what happened to the Israelites. But God warns that judgment will fall on the false shepherds, the wicked leaders who did not care for the Israelite people and caused the exile. And not only the leaders, but God also judges the powerful among the people, the fat sheep who trampled their fellow sheep. Okay, so I find hope by turning to the past, to the Bible, and saying, God said, do not fear. God said to the Israelite people in exile. Now, did that mean that all the Israelite people would immediately be freed from the Persians and return to Jerusalem? No. A lot of the Israelites died in exile. But ultimately, this came true, what Ezekiel prophesied. And the Israelites did return. Okay. So Obama just recently said, the arc of justice, the arc of the moral arc bends towards justice. Sometimes it needs a push. All right, we need to be the pushers. That means we need to have a vision of something different. And I'm hoping that by the next election, we will have politicians who are putting forward a more hopeful vision, that people can see that vision and say, yes, that's the way I would like to live. And we can act. And we may feel like one little action won't be enough, but remember, those actions do add up. And Jesus also said, okay, so God said he would tend his sheep and create a new covenant of peace. And Jesus also said, do not fear those who kill the body, fear God and God alone, and warned that his followers would be persecuted. And you know what they were? I mean, Peter was crucified upside down. We're called to live in interesting times, but we're not alone, okay? We have a vision of something better. We can take steps towards making that happen. And in action, you feel less hopeless. You know, when you act, then you feel strength, you feel courage. And then you think about, again, I come back again to the Irish monk. You can only ask, did I try? You might not succeed. Remember Václav Havel, who said, it's meaningful to try. I may not succeed. Well, guess what? He did succeed. So, you know, we don't start by saying, we're going to lose. We're going to lose. You start by saying, we got a vision and we're going to win. We're going to succeed. We're going to take every action we can, but we're not going to ask ourselves, did I try hard enough or did I succeed? We might succeed. We might not, but it's not meaningless even if you don't succeed. Alexei Navalny was not meaningless, even though the regime did kill him. Believe me, he weakened Putin in the eyes of many. He'll succeed eventually, but not in his lifetime. Yeah.
I don't know if this helps, but I think we have to begin our day with saying thank you to God. Because if we start planting these powerful words and be grateful, God can do many things with that. And if others hear us saying thank you and being grateful, that can spread just like fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that simple, and it's a good thing. So this morning I was telling a friend that I thank God for that I could even open my eyes and that I could see and that I could breathe and that I knew my family was breathing. And it just started me thinking about what else can I say. And with those powerful words, it brought hope. It brought strength because you're asking God to be a part of your life and he is there for you. So I think maybe it starts with gratitude first. So.
Yeah. That's helpful. Thank you. Okay, there's someone here.
During the whole first session that you gave us, I kept thinking of Charlie Kirk and his life and his work and his death. And he gave a lot of people a lot of hope.
Yeah. I mean, I think right now, whether you're, a Democrat or a Republican, I think none of us want to live with this kind of polarization. We want fraternity, and we want it on both sides. So we need to find a vision that we can all hold together. Go ahead.
I want to thank you for having the big table of all the issues, small things we can do, because that really is to me the challenge for hope, pragmatic in terms of doing stuff. Because I sometimes see people falling into the trap of, well, we'll just have to get, pass a law, or get some politician or some group to do something. And I say, no, it's up to us as individuals. I was a science major at St. John's, and I ran across this in Paul Douglas's book,
Paul
Caring
Douglas.
for Creation. I dog-eared, coffee stained, everything. Albert Einstein said, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Science is essential, but fundamentally incomplete. I, through my lifetime, have seen the button heads between science and religion, arguing about everything from evolution to blah, 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 or solutions to everything. And I say, really, it boils back down to the greatest commandment. The Pharisees were trying to trick up Christ, say, what's the greatest commandment? Didn't name any of the ones. He named love God with your whole heart and soul. That's essentially what this book is all about. How do you love God? You say, I love God, I love God. No, you care for his creation.
Yeah.
And you gave a lot of ways we can do this.
And then he said, and the second is like it, you love your neighbor.
Well, and I see that sometimes as an issue. You forget the first part, love God, and you go, but love your neighbor as yourself. Yes, but the greatest is actually love God.
Yeah.
And you look at the way the 10 Commandments are listed, the first 3, I believe, have to do with love God, and the last 7 have to do with loving your neighbor as yourself.
Yes, that's right.
Do you think the theology of some Christians with a primary focus on individuals going to heaven and on the end of the world and the second coming actually exacerbates the problem because they don't really take seriously the responsibility to care for and protect this world?
Well, yeah, when I was a kid, back in the 1980s, I think the Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, said, well, we don't need to take care of our national parks or our national forests because Jesus is coming and the world's going to end. He had the expectation that the world would end in his lifetime. But, I already spoke to that, right? When I said, well, who are we to think we know when the angels don't know, when Jesus said even he didn't know when the world would end. So, yeah, I think if we just say, well, we don't need to take care of the earth because the world's going to end, well, we don't know that. We can't know that. The angels don't know that. So, and if we say, well, it doesn't really matter because I'm going, I'm just concerned with going to heaven. One of the problems that I think we face, and I think actually our whole computer-saturated society has exacerbated this, is that we tend to have what scientists would call a Cartesian notion based after Descartes. Descartes thought, well, the soul or the mind and the body are completely separable, and we're just souls that are plunked into a body, This was actually an ancient heresy called Gnosticism, which said, matter is bad, only soul stuff is good. And right now we're trapped in this bad matter, material body, and we just can't wait for death when we can get out of this body and be souls. That was called a heresy back in the 3rd century. Because what do we say when we say the Apostles' Creed? We say, I believe in the resurrection of the body. We are embodied creatures, and we forget that to our peril. So we have some computer scientists like Ray Kurzweil who can't wait for science. In fact, well, since he's in his 70s, he's going to have his body frozen so that he can wait after he dies till science figures out how to upload our brains to computers. And I'm thinking, no, it's not going to work. He said, well, we'll just figure out what the neuronal structure is in a brain, and we'll do that in the computer. And I'm thinking, yeah. And what about all of the neurotransmitters, the hormones like oxytocin and dopamine and stuff? Because you know what? If you don't have those, your brain goes bad. And well, what about all the neuronal stuff in our guts? We better upload that too. Oh gosh, what about the microbiota? Because if your microbiota is way off, you can get clinically depressed. I thought, I think anybody whose head is in a computer is bound to be clinically depressed. First thing he'll probably say is, "Get me out of here." But again, it's that mindset that we're just minds that are somehow trapped in a body. That's the old Gnostic heresy. Okay, we're not. We're a whole person, body and mind and soul. And when we are resurrected, we will be a whole person. Resurrection of the body. Now, this is a good thing, right? Because think about it. If you could upload your mind to a computer, you could make copies, right? Which one is you? You won't be unique anymore. You could get hacked. You won't be you anymore. I mean, this is a really bad idea. But, it's also a part of the idea. When we spend all our time online, we start thinking, no, I'm just a mind. I could pretty much exist in cyberspace. No, you can't. You are physical. We evolved to be a part of this ecosystem, to be a part of the physical world. Now, if we don't take care of that world, then we are in trouble. If we think, well, we could just live in cyberspace. Well, no, we can't. And if we damage the world, it will damage us and our children and our grandchildren. Okay, so we need to accept the fact that, and we do, think about it. This is something Christianity brings to the table of world religions that is unique, and it's the importance of the physical, the importance of the body. Think about our sacraments. All of them have a material element, right? The waters of baptism, the bread and the wine of the Eucharist, the oil of anointing. They all recognize that we aren't just mental soul beings. We are physical beings in a physical world. Think about our feast days. What are the two big feasts of Christianity? Christmas and Easter, right? What are they all about? The incarnation. We believe in a God who took on a physical body, and he sanctified physicality by doing that. We believe in a God who wanted so much to have a close relationship with us that he experienced in the flesh what we experience. Shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. He felt emotions. You have to have a body to feel emotions. You feel emotions in your body before your head clicks in. Okay? He felt emotions. He suffered. He died. And then there's Easter. He rose again in a body. A changed body, yes, but still a body. Okay? So those that say we don't need to worry about our bodies or about the earth around us, I think that's heresy, actually. It's pretty poor theology anyway. Maybe I won't go that far, but it's poor theology to say it doesn't matter. Our bodies don't matter. Our physicality, the world around us doesn't matter, because that is not what Christianity teaches. Okay, hands all over. There's some in the back yet.
Yes, thank you for talking about hope, I'm just thinking of hope versus faith and a correlation between hope and faith. And it seems we kind of evolved that true hope or faith is essential for true hope. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think without true faith, hope could be a false hope, as believing in AI or believing in a world leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so, am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, I think you are. We can have false hopes, whether they're that big, and societal type of hopes or personal hopes, You can have the hope that a person will change, if you're in a relationship with somebody. And, it can be a false hope. So yeah, there can be false hopes, but I think ultimately we need to have hope. As Martin Luther said, and I quoted earlier, nobody starts something without having hope that it will succeed. And so hope is a precursor to action, but it's also in action that we often find our hope. Faith is more figuring out how to orient that hope. Yeah.
Thank you. Back to that first question, where do we find hope? And when I'm listening to We're Not Alone and listening to Love Your Neighbor, social connection and community settings and intentional community and gathering as embodied individuals, I think, we talk about AI and technology and a lot of this reflection, it can start to feel isolating when we're sitting in our fear. And it can be hard to hear, do not be afraid when you feel alone.
Yeah.
But when you find those times to come together, such as an opportunity like this, to get informed from different perspectives, see that bigger picture, pull the history that matters into our current situation, I think this is a setting that can inspire that hope, that can help us be creative and imaginative in what action step is next. So I just wanted to add
Thank
that
you.
community
Yeah,
relation.
that's really helpful.
I also found in a lot of things that happened, mistakes are made, and that's how we learn too. Even today, we think one can solve everything. He made a lot of mistakes already, and I think we learn from that too.
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do very much. Okay, we got some questions in the front too. There, and then we got one here.
I was just going to say, how did you become interested in technology? Because there is definitely a divide with generations and the speed of technology and trying to feel connected, because even now within the diocese, in order to get signed up for even an event, you have to go to the QR code. They're starting to take away the telephone numbers to make that connection to register.
Mhm.
What do you say to the generations that are struggling with that? Because we're told, well, just go to a smartphone, use that, but not everyone can afford that, nor do they know how to operate one, and they feel even more isolated. Who do you turn to for that information? So how did you become interested in technology? Is that just a natural interest of yours, or did you have to work really hard to understand it?
Yeah, well, I was in technology before I was in theology. I was tenured here at St. John's in computer science and the computer science department, and I taught in that department up until last May, when I retired from that department and took a position just in the School of Theology. So I came to technology probably fairly naturally because my father held patents on some of the first computers. He worked for UNIVAC, if some of you are old enough to remember when UNIVAC used to exist, and he was an electrical engineer for them. But I became interested in AI, teaching a course on AI, and that actually led me into theology because I was newly tenured, going to take my first sabbatical and thinking about a sabbatical project. And I got to thinking, at that time, there were philosophers who were writing about, can we create an artificial general intelligence? They called it a strong AI in those days. And one of them just died, John Searle, just died a few days ago. He was at Berkeley. And no one was asking the question, well, why do we want to? You know, because it seemed to me as a computer scientist, and I wasn't a specialist in AI, but it seemed to me the computers were the most useful when they did the things we couldn't do or didn't want to do. You know, either the drudgery, you know, or the, you know, computations that would take us forever that they could do like that. And I thought, why are we trying to make the computer be just like us? That doesn't seem particularly useful, you know? And so I went off on sabbatical thinking, okay, I'll write about this. Nobody's written about this. And I fell flat on my face. I accomplished nothing because I wasn't trained to tackle that question. I was a computer scientist. This was not a question about computers. This was a question about human motivations. But it still interested me. And so I came back with my tail between my legs, you know, saying, well, I didn't accomplish much on sabbatical, but realized I needed more training. And the more I thought, we're trying to make the computer in our image, I thought, oh, where have I heard that language before? Sounds like Genesis 1. And then I thought, now this is getting even more interesting because we see ourselves as being in the image of God. Now, that image is partial, right? We're not God. And we're going to try to make the computer in our image, that image is going to be partial too. And I thought, oh, I wonder if the parts are the same. You know, do we see ourselves as reflecting the same things in God that we're trying to make the computer reflect from us? And that became then my motivating question. And I was like, okay, I got to study some theology. I was like, oh, we got a School of Theology right here. So I'm an alum of the School of Theology. It was wonderful preparation, and I got the theology bug. And St. John's was kind enough to give me a 2-year leave of absence from my position in computer science. And I went off to Berkeley because that's where all the philosophers of AI were, and got a Ph.D. in theology. And so I started with the technology side and then moved into theology from there.
There's a disconnect with our generations. And so the younger generations, they have speed, they have knowledge, they have courage going in and pressing buttons and whatever. But there is also a generation that they liked everything that came before that.
Yeah.
And now they're almost being left out. They cannot find a way to communicate with the present way of reaching out, whether it's medical, whether it's just for something fun like a concert or whatever. It's so complicated. So what do you say to bring this together so we don't become more separated? And maybe because you're used to that, it's not as a part of your world, but it is a part of.
All right, right. Well, we live in rapidly changing times, and this is something that's going to happen in rapidly changing times. It may mean that, yeah, it's going to be much easier for younger generations to do something. And we could look at that then as saying, well, this should be a chance to unify us, you know, to reach out to that younger generation and say, hey, I need some help. Can you help me get those concert tickets? So that's one possibility. The other thing is that I think we have to recognize when we look at that there's a lot that we had that they didn't get. you know. A lot of the younger generation has not had the opportunity to play outside very much. They go home, their parents think they're safer online, they're not. And so they keep them inside on their screens. Most of us in this room, I imagine, had free range childhoods where we could, a mom would say, be home for dinner, and didn't know where we were. We didn't have a cell phone. They couldn't keep track of us. They didn't know what we were doing. We arranged, and most of the time we got home in time for dinner, you know. Um, and there was something that we got from that, a closeness to nature, social skills. We made up games with our friends and we learned how to negotiate. We got different things than they are getting. I worry now with the chatbots that we have, that it's going to be very difficult it's going to be more difficult for young people to develop the critical thinking skills that we developed. It's just too easy to say to ChatGPT, I got to write a paper on Hannah Arendt and totalitarianism, help me out, and not have to do the searching. So I think we also need to recognize that we had things that they might not have. So it's not just a one-way street that, oh, we're being left out, they're so good at this technology. And so as we reach down to them to say, hey, can you help me program this new machine? We need to also encourage them to reach to us for the wisdom that we accumulated living in that non-technological time. Okay. Yeah.
She got a name.
Do you still have a question here in front? Do you still have? Oh, you did. Okay. Then we grab a few more in the back.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated this time for reflection, and I needed, that's why I came. I wanted to hear about hope because we are living in a troubled time. But I can't help but reflect on there's no place on earth that has a utopia,
Right.
right? And every generation has its struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And yet people choose to have children. There's hope. There's something about life. I remember as a teenager, I think there was a song, something about, what's it all about anyway, Alfie? And I used to ask myself, I still do every once in a while, say, what's it all about? Why am I here? What's it for? So you have this span maybe of 80 or 90 years. That's what you've been given. But you're living in a world that has good and evil. There's always people searching for power, greed, more, trampling on others to get that. But there's also the good, the people that work for those who are underserved, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know what I'm even really saying other than it seems like, what is the purpose of life? And we are brought into a world that has conflict, good and evil. And that's where I think our faith and our hope is so important because it sustains us and gives us a reason to exist and try to better the world while we are here.
Yes, exactly. That's well said. Also, for me, one of the things I've found is that as I've started to feel like the times are kind of challenging, it's brought me closer to Scripture. Because I realized as I turned back to Scripture that, boy, these Scriptures were written in challenging times. These were written by people who were living in very challenging times, whether it's still the Old Testament and the empires that kept overrunning the land, or whether it's the New Testament. The New Testament was written when the Israelites were under Roman occupation. These were challenging times for them, and they don't shy away from that. But they give you, reasons to hope. The times will probably always have challenges. And then you mentioned, there's good people doing good things. There's bad people, doing bad things. One of the things that I do want to mention, I always ended my class on Islam with this, is a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who said, "The line between good and evil runs through every human heart." And when we start dividing, us and them, when we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, that's wrong. There is good and evil in each of us. And, we hope to bring out as much of the good as we can in ourselves and in our actions. And sometimes we will make mistakes, and sometimes we will fail. But that's all part of life. And it's never been any different. My parents lived through World War II, as probably many of yours did as well. And before that, World War I, and before that, Napoleon was running around conquering things, and colonizers were going into countries and doing horrible things, and there before that there was slavery in this country. It's never been a perfect time. So we have the time that we have the challenges that we have, and for each generation, the challenge might be different, but it will always be there. Okay, we have time for one more.
I always look for little areas that give a little bit of hope. Last fall, Food Shelf in Otana had a newsletter, and we're talking about there's no waste. Any food that goes out of date, they send to hog farmers south of town, and they either feed it to them livestock or compost it.
Yep.
So when I come here and go to the refectory last night, first thing I'm looking at is when the trays and silverware and everything is going over how much of that is waste. Interesting book that I read about 40 years ago called American Wasteland. I recommend it to everyone because 30 to 40% of our food is wasted. And he documents it. And so you don't have to argue about it. But the thing about this is I also was a little bit encouraged with the Abbey banner here because it's another area that I've always come back to college for reunions. And I'm looking at the acres and acres of turf grass lawn that we spend piles and piles of resources to manicure in the manner to create in the manner to which we like to see. Not that that's the way that it is naturally, but I'm looking here. They've got a pollinator garden section in here where they are talking about saving $18,000 annually by converting some of these lawn areas to gardens. Otana, I'm signed up for it next month as a community ed class or adult education class that's got a pollinator rain garden seminar where the city of Otana will fund half of your rain garden, and I put term pollinator on it because we got pollinator friendly people also, and they will fund half of your dollars for creating one or designing one. A lot less resources spent. But anyway, lots of areas that we can just take personal involvement. That's a lot of energy.
Yeah, and that's I mean again, it really comes down to small actions do add up. So take the small actions, whether it's in politics, whether it's in climate change, whether it's deciding you're not going to buy that brand new iPhone because your old iPhone is working just fine. In all of these areas, we can take action and as we take action together, it can add up, but also as we take action, we will feel more hope because we'll know that we're doing something. And it's not up to us to ask the question of, will we succeed or when will we succeed? But to know, as Obama said, that arc is there. Even you giving it a little push helps it bend in the right direction. And especially if all of us give it a little push, those pushes will add up. Okay, thank you very much for listening.